Hi everybody, Joe Brancato, the Airgun Scientist, and today we're going to go over how you mount a scope that you've finally chosen from watching our previous video on Scopes 101. First thing I'll look at is how does a person, I'll just tell a person, let me see how you hold the gun. And some people, such as I, will kind of go forward. I like my head forward when I shoot. I kind of creep up on the scope. Some people are just the opposite. They're like this. I don't know how it's comfortable for them, but hey, that's how they like to shoot. They're back here, and then some others are in between. So for a guy like me, or whoever, I know I'll just put the scopes, I'll open up the tops, and I'll mount the scope rings without the tops on first. And I have them on because I'm lazy and I don't want to take them off. I already have the scope mounted from a previous time, so I'm just kind of fake it a little bit here. But the rings are off, okay? I'll take the tops off and I'll just lay the scope on there. And I'll tell the gentleman or lady, okay, hold the gun steady, don't let the scope fall out. All right, do you see the full picture? You want to do what's called the eye relief. You want to determine your eye relief. And what the eye relief is, when you have your face the proper distance from the scope, about this far. It's exactly that far from me. I now have the proper eye relief that I can see from here to here, and everything here around this ring is clear view of a picture. There's no black. Now, if I move away from that proper spot or too close to that proper spot, the proper spot being right here, if I go closer or further, you'll see a black cloud start to go like this. The picture gets smaller. Your eye relief is incorrect. So the very first thing we'll do is we'll slap a scope mounts on. We'll have the tops out. We'll put the scope on. We'll just put the 4 screws or 8 screws in loosely. Enough that you can rotate it, push it forward, push it back. And then I'll give a good idea of where the person's face is. I'll move the end of the scope about this far from his eyes. And then I'll say, what do you see? Does it look clear? And another thing which I will do, okay, this is kind of important. Don't mount the scope and ask the guy, does this work? Because this is what everybody will do. They'll adjust to what the scope is mounted. Instead, adjust the scope to how the person holds the gun. How do you do that? I just tell a person very simply, do me a favor, hold the gun like this. Close your eyes. Hold the gun like you're going to shoot it. Now there's no prejudice in their setup on how to put their face on the scope. And if their face is right here, which is comfortable, but the scope's way up here, then you know scope's got to come back. And then that's how you really get the best way of setting the eye relief. And then if they get to the point where, okay, you've got it all the way back here and there's no more adjustment, then you got to tell them, okay, you got to creep up a little bit and kind of learn how to do that. But always put it on such that the person's comfortable. Don't make them adjust to the gun. Adjust the scope to the shooter. So the first thing, eye relief. Now that we've gone forward and backward, where to set it for the eye relief, the next thing is scope height. You really want to have, actually you should do this even beforehand, is get the right height. Because some guns just demand a high scope ring right off the bat. Example, the Air Force guns, Talons, Condors, Texans. If you don't have a high ring or a high mount, you're pretty much facing right against the bottle and it's not comfortable. I always say, when in doubt, go for a higher ring. You can't mess up going for a higher ring. In fact, with pellets, the way they have a parabola, it doesn't hurt. It even helps a little bit to have a higher ring. Don't think this is like in a rifle that's a powder burner where you're shooting basically a laser and a laser, and you want them to be close to each other. You don't need that. High mounts are fine on an air gun. So we determined that our scope mounts needed to be Picatinny on the rifle side, 34 millimeter in this particular case on this side. We chose to go with a pair that have the Accutac with the scope levels in them. We mounted the scope loosely. It's loose in here. We can push the scope backwards and forwards. That way, you can set the scope until you have the full field of view, otherwise known as proper eye relief. Now that we have the proper eye relief at the proper distance and the proper height, we can snug down just the mounts to the gun because you're not going to move it back and forth. We didn't snug them down yet because the scope might have had to come back or forward. Now I'm going to tighten it down because I have it where I like it, which is far forward because I reach far forward. So now we've secured the mounts. Now we have to do the next thing, which is make sure that our reticle is neither tilted this way or that way so that the line isn't going this way and that or that way. It's straight up and down, vertical and horizontal. And we use this machine here. We sell these. These are fantastic. Where were these years ago, man? I was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Pinholes and pieces of aluminum foil. But this little doodad, all you do, you just put this on the Picatinny, and then you put this piece here, and you slide it up until it butts up against this flat spot of the scope. And then you just rock it back and forth as you're pushing this up. As you push this up, it's taking up the space until you can't rock it anymore, and then the scope is level. And then you pull it out, don't move the scope, and you cinch down your 8 or 4 screws. Now, there's a method to my madness. I torque in a very fixed sequence. First of all, I'm a little OCD. I like everything to look good when it goes out of our shop. So the first thing I want is the caps have even width of spacing on both sides. Does it need to be like that? No. Does it look nicer when we do that and more professional? Yes. So you just snug down the caps. Don't rotate the scope. Snug down the caps gently. I go in this type of order. I'll snug here, then I'll just, or not even snug, just get the play out of it. Then I take the play out of this, this, and this, in that order. One across, down, and across. Don't do these two, and don't do these two. The reason is if you do these two first, you'll cant the scope this way, the scope will tighten down this way, and then so you may have rotated the scope. You don't want that, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order, doesn't matter where you start. But do one across, go down, do the other one across. Now, you've got the scope cinched down. It's plumb because we used our little handy dandy tool. And now your scope is pretty much where it should be. So the next thing we're going to do is one time and one time only for the first time and last. Is that clear? Adjust the focus on the reticle. Now that's this knob back here. You do it once, you forget it. I think I made that clear by saying that enough times. What do? You're not focusing on the target. In fact, I just point it to a blank space on the wall, and I almost prefer it not to be the wall in focus because you're not focusing on the wall. You're focusing on the reticle. Now, if it's a second focal plane scope, you don't need to do anything. You just start twisting the knob until it's focused. If it's a first focal plane scope, I tend to put it on the higher power so that the reticle expands and you can see the numbers really clearly. And that just shows me more accurately how focused it is. If you have it down on the lower powers, like if it's a 5 to 25, if you have it on 5, everything's kind of small. A little harder to see if it's in and out of focus. For me, maybe your mileage may vary, it's different. Focus out to 25, adjust this until everything just looks nice and clean. Now how I focus, you're gonna get to a spot where like if I turn it from here, it looks clear, to here, it looks clear. So what I do is I go until I just notice it's out of focus here and out of focus here. And then just split the difference. Then you're right in the center of in focus. So that will now be your adjustment for your reticle. You never touch it again. Some scopes, like the Hawks, have a locking ring that prevent you from even moving it after you lock it down, which is good. Because sometimes you'll get a newbie that, you know, maybe a friend that's shooting your gun and like, let me focus it. Oh, and it will actually focus it, but it also throw it off. Oh, and by the way, yeah, it does affect the focus of this part too. So get this done first, lock it down. And then you start to focus the scope for the distance you're at. That's a whole different topic. That's usage of the scope. We first put the rings on roughly where we think they're going to go. Put the gun in loosely, cinch it down that you can rotate it just so it doesn't fall off, okay? Snug these up by finger tight. Give it to your customer or to yourself, look through it. Do I have to come, close your eyes and look through it. Do I have to come closer or further? Move it accordingly. Once you get that to where it should be, then you can cinch down just the mounts. Now that you cinch down the mounts, then you level the scope as we showed to you before using that handy dandy little triangular thing. Cinch it down and you're there. So now that you've mounted your scope, it's time to sight it in. We typically sight in our scopes at 50 yards, and I'll explain to you why. When you throw a baseball, it falls in an arc, more correctly called a parabola, okay? And that is, if you want to throw it from here to there, you actually have to throw it up. Gravity starts pulling it down. It gets to a peak right there, or an apex, and then it falls, and it hits your target, okay? Well, same thing happens with a pellet, identical. You might think it's flying straight, but it's not. It's flying in an arc. And we're going to adjust for that with the scope. Now, you see the scope is above the barrel. So let's draw our eye. That's the worst looking eye I ever drew, but there it is. Your eye sees like this. Oh boy, this is hard to draw on the side, guys. I am not that good from doing this on the side. If this is 50 yards and we have it dead on at 50 yards, by design, let's just say that the pellet peaks at 50, and this is all for generality, but this is pretty good. At 50 yards, the rifle's peaked, and at there it falls down, and here it falls down. We sight it in for 50 yards. That means, well, let's ask this question. If I were to, no matter where this scope is sighted in, we're going to shoot below wherever it says at this range by 2 inches. And that's because the barrel is 2 inches below the scope. So that's like right here, 2 inches, okay? At 50, it's dead on. So at 20, it's going to be a little low. At 30, it's going to be better. At 40, it's going to be pretty much dead on. At 50, it is dead on. At 55, it's still pretty much dead on. But at 60 and all that, it starts to fall off again. So 50, you're dead on. So if this is my scope, it's like that. Now, maybe at 30, I'm making these numbers up, okay? But it's to teach you the generalities. At 30, you might be hitting down here, okay? So we'll put 30 on this side. And then at 10, and again, I'm just doing this to show you how to do this, you put 10 here, okay? Now, this might be same distance here. Let's call that 60 yards. 60 yards. So I'll put a little, this is my cheat sheet, by the way, that I'm making. I'm going to make a little tiny copy of this about the size of a bottle cap or maybe a little bigger and tape a piece of tape with those figures on it. And then this might be 80, okay? And whatever's in between that you want to put in there. But what you do is for the one dot, you put what your distance is. For your other dot, you put what your distances are. And then for the half dot in between them, or whatever you want to do, you can say that range on here. And then you'll know where you have to hit. It's a lot easier than clicking in your gun. I used to click in, and I'll show to you what that looks like. This is another one of my AZ Rapids. For you older folks, you know what I'm talking about. You younger guys are just going to scratch your heads and go, I don't know, I've never heard of that thing. But these were the bomb at one time. And Alan would come up with these caps that rotated, and you would put your ranges, or he would do it for you, for a certain pellet at certain distances. You would just dial it in. That's great thinking. You want to turn it in, you put your range in there. But to be honest with you, if you're chasing a rabbit and you're constantly adjusting that knob, you get lost. Am I on? Right here it says 90, right here it says 30, right there it says 110. Which one of those am I turned on right now? I forgot. It's a lot easier not to turn your knob and adjust. It's a lot easier to just know which mil dot. Use either your laser rangefinder to get the distance or your side focus to get the distance. But immediately you can just pick a dot and know where it's going because you have a cheat sheet somewhere on your gun. Much faster, much quicker than getting lost with how high to turn the knob and you're twisting it and you get all befuddled and all that. It's just quicker. So that's the real good way to do it. Sight in at around 50. There's a target that we have. Go on my old website. It's an old website, but the target is still there, airtanksforsale.com. At the very bottom of the page is a free target. It has 5x5. In other words, 5 across by 5 down, total of 25 targets. Get as OCD as you want. You can put 3 pellets in each target at 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, 60 yards, blah, 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 blah. And then what you do is you just look at, oh, well, this is where I'm going to hit here. This is where I'm going to hit here. This is where I'm going to hit here. And then you make your cheat sheet accordingly. So that's a good way to do it too. This is about everything you're going to need to know how to nail that rabbit quickly. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We're trying to make it easier for you to help yourselves or understand how we put your scopes on. This is Joe Brancato, the Airgun Scientist, saying take care, God bless. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel.